Hello, my name is OnesieBanette. I am the coach of the Solihull Skarmours, and I am absolutely thrilled to announce that I will be competing as a member of the Bolt division for the new season of the PPL Bolt and Flare Leagues. Now, the Pokemon Premier League proper has had some incredible coaches, such as Pokeaim, such as Envy, such as Mephisto, such as, of course, Jack Gravy, and many, many others that I can't even remember off the top of my head. But because of the success of the Pokemon Premier League and all of the amazing stuff that has come out of it, the PPL has decided to expand into two D-League formats, PPL Bolt and PPL Flare. Now, they're split up into sort of time zone regions, so one of them is basically EU, one of them is basically NA, and all that other good stuff. But I will be competing in the Bolt division. Now, while there may have been some incredible coaches in the first season of the Pokemon Premier League since Draft League has reinvigorated itself, this season of PPL Bolt and Flare also has some incredible coaches, such as Frosted, such as KJ, such as, of course, the return of my good friend Shroomraver and Frank Trode, competing in Draft for the first time in over 5 years. So this is hype, to say the very least. And as such, it's my job today to talk you through my draft for the Pokemon Premier League Bolt division. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Now, my first pick for the PPL, I was position 11, which meant that I had to wait for 10 other Pokemon to get picked before I was able to make my decision, basically, which was a little bit of a problem. And as such, what that meant is that I had to basically study the board and decide what I thought would be fun to build around this season. And since a lot of the massive threats had already been taken at that point in the draft, such as things like Baxcalibur and Great Tusk had already gone, which made me very, very sad because I really wanted to try out Great Tusk, I figured, why not pick a mon that I haven't used, but I've built with a lot? Because during the PDD, I helped my good friend Kahlua Boom, the coach of the NJ Goldengos, build his teams for the PDD. And he had a Sneasler in it, which was very fun. So I did a lot of calcs with Sneasler. I'm very aware of how it plays, and I figured I would take that. So we picked up Sneasler, and we decided that that was going to be pretty much the best thing left on the board I could take that would also be quite fun to use. I have a lot of experience with Unburdened Mons. They are very, very potent in this meta because speed is so important. So being able to go before your opponent and dish out massive damage, you can turn the tide of a game completely in your favour. It gives your draft another dimension, and yeah, it just seemed like a really fun thing to do. So our first pick was Sneasler. Now, because of our position in the draft, we were position 11, which meant that on one side of the draft, there was quite a long wait where I had to wait for 20 Pokemon to get picked. And on the other side, I only had to wait for around 8. So it came back to me quite quickly. And I figured what would be fun to pair with Sneasler. I mean, Hazards is obviously a good start. I mean, something that can also hit hard, that can't be burnt, something to deal with the Pokemon that Sneasler can't. I just enjoy clicking buttons. So the next Pokemon that fit a lot of those requirements was, of course, Ogerpon Hearthflame. I have always wanted to try this thing ever since the DLC's come out. This thing looks so much fun. It hits so hard. It is fairly bulky. It's very fast. It has a lot of fun utility options, and I cannot wait to try this thing out. I am absolutely in love with Ogerpon. I think this thing is just so adorable, and it has such a cool little playstyle with its masks, and I figured it would be good for content as well. So Ogerpon Hearthflame was our second pick this season, and it's going to complement our speed tiers very nicely, as we now have a 110 and a 120, and they both hit pretty damn hard. Now, our third pick was basically one that I wanted to pick because A, it got buffed in the Teal Mask DLC with the return of one of its signature moves, and it also enables the other two to do very, very big damage. So my third pick was Rillaboom. Now, it does not share a speed tier with the other two. It basically enables Sneasler to self-proc its Unburden with the Grassy Seed, which, as I mentioned, Unburden is very, very potent, and it also gives Ogerpon access to do very big damage with power whips boosted by grassy terrain, and also gives them both access to Grassy Glide, which could be very interesting. I could see a couple of... I could see some Grassy Glide shenanigans coming in handy with both mons. Rillaboom also gives me U-turn, a little bit of momentum, and it's just cool. I mean, it weakens ground types, which is very nice for Sneasler, because basically some of Sneasler's best responses is bulky grounds. Grass weakens that and allows Sneasler to potentially muscle through them with Swords Dance or bulk up boosts. And also, it stops Earthquake being a massive hindrance to Ogerpon as well. Basically turning Ogerpon into basically an Earthquake answer if I want it to be. It was a really, really interesting idea, and I just figured it worked really well. It does make me a little bit grass heavy, but that's a risk and a problem I'm willing to deal with in order to ensure I can have some very good offensive options. So yes, Rillaboom joins the squad. Now, after those first three, I was feeling very confident. But I wasn't 100% sure on what my next mon should be. I figured I probably wanted something with a little bit of defog. I wanted some hazard removal, and I probably needed a little bit of bulk. And a good mon that I saw around that was two types that I didn't already have basically fit that role was Mandibuzz. So Mandibuzz joins the team as well. Mandibuzz gives us access to defog, it gives us foul play, it's fairly bulky, it obviously has Roost as well, it can pivot with U-turn, it can do weak armor shenanigans. It just seemed like it complemented things very well. The ice type moves that Mandibuzz is obviously going to be weak to are going to be a problem, because I'm starting to build up a little bit of a weakness to it with Rillaboom and Mandibuzz, but that is also a problem I'm willing to fix down the line during this draft. So Mandibuzz complements the other two. It can also get rid of any sort of terrain if I really need it gone for whatever reason. And yeah, it just seemed like a really fun mon. I needed some kind of bulk. It fit the job. So Mandibuzz is going to be our fourth member here. And my light has just died. Fun times. I guess we're doing this in the dark. Don't worry, I managed to fix my light. Not that you were worried anyway. But yes, the next mon that we decided to pick up was, of course, gonna have to be another little bit of bulk. I was starting to get a little bit worried about what I should pick up next, because I'd already picked up my 3 offensive Pokemon that I was happy to build the team around, but I really didn't know where to go from here. I figured I should probably just start trying to fill in archetypes, and one of those archetypes, of course, is the very important Fairy Dragon Steel core. And a mon that also gave me a little bit of extra bulk, a lot of utility options, and was a Pokemon that is relatively unexplored in the draft scene is Fezandipiti. This thing came out in the Teal Mask and hasn't had a lot of starring roles yet, so I figured, having a look at this thing, it had a very interesting chance of being a good mon, basically. I decided to pick it up because it also fixed the speed tier for me. It sits nicely in between Rillaboom and Ogerpon Hearthflame, sitting at that 99 speed, which honestly is a little bit less than ideal, but it will do the job, fingers crossed, if I'm able to just basically keep going with fixing my speed tiers, and hopefully I shouldn't have to rely on bringing a max speed Fezandipiti very often. The idea with this guy is it's bulky, it has a hell of a lot of utility options with Roost, I believe it gets access to Nasty Plot, it gets Toxic Chain of course, and Toxic to spread around removal, it gets Taunt, it gets Tailwind, it has some really cool options. So I decided, Fezandipiti, it's your time to show me what you're made of. Hopefully we can get some cool, fun, meme heat sets going with this. But if not, it still looks cool, and I can always drop it if I need to. But yes, it's an option. I've got it. If I need it, it's there. Now the next mon, of course, I mentioned earlier I was building around trying to fit my archetypes correctly and fill in my cores. And one of my cores I decided probably needed sorting out was the Fairy Dragon Steel core. So how can you have a Fairy Dragon Steel core without a Steel? And I think I've picked up a very, very good Steel here, because the next mon, the 6th Pokemon on the team, is King Gambit. Now King Gambit, of course, is a fighting, very weak to fighting type moves. It is Steel and Dark. Fezandipiti resists fighting, Sneasler resists fighting. I figured that I could cover for its weaknesses very well. So Kingambit is here. It's very bulky. Obviously, we know what Kingambit can do. It is one of the biggest threats in the OU tier just because that Sucker Punch and that Supreme Overlord is so oppressive. And Kingambit has the potential to really clutch games out of thin air. And hopefully, that's what it's going to be able to do for us this season. So Kingambit joins the squad. Now I realised I have quite a few setup options. I have Sword Stance on Sneasler, Ogerpon, Rillaboom, and I have Nasty Plot on Mandibuzz and Fezandipity. And the best way for me to ensure that I'm able to get off some very tasty sweeps is to find a good screens user. And why not go for the best screens user in the entire game with Regieleki, the fastest screens user in the entire game, one of the most offensive electric types in the entire format. It is massive, it does huge damage, it is incredibly fast, it's got fast screens, it hits hard on both sides of the spectrum. Regieleki was perfect here. It also sits at an incredible 200 speed stat, which obviously there's just a little bit of a gap between that and Sneasler, but that's fine. Hopefully Regieleki is going to be able to control speed tiers against opponents, force them to bring their ground types, which I can take advantage of with Ogerpon and Rillaboom. If my opponents do not bring their ground types, then Regieleki will go ham. It is a Regieleki, and if they do, I can take advantage of them with the Rillaboom. So there's a bit of synergy there. It seemed like a good idea, and I'm very happy with what I did. So yes, there we go. Regieleki joins the team. Now, I have a fire type. I have a grass type. I figured I should probably complete the trio and pick up myself a water type. But with my grassy terrain pickup with the Rillaboom, I was a little bit conscious about drafting a Pokemon that is weak to grass, because I'm going to boost up their moves and make it impossible to switch into. So I wanted to get myself a water type that didn't only not fear grass type moves, but also kind of invited grass types to, appreciates having grass types in so it can take advantage of them. And the best one I saw on the board, and it hits like an absolute truck, so I'm delighted to have it with me, is Volcanion. Volcanion, however you wish to pronounce it. I don't care, it's mine, and I'm so looking forward to using it. This thing sits at a nice little speed stat of 70, so it's slightly underneath Mandibuzz and above Kingambit. It slots nicely into the middle, forcing opponents to have to try and speed creep me a little bit more effectively. It hits incredibly hard with its Steam Eruption and Fire Blast combo. There's not many things in the game that want to switch into that. Of course, dragons can switch into it fairly well, but any dragon that's coming in is running the risk of a 30% burn from Steam Eruption, so feel free to take that gamble, my friends. Volcanion is going to be able to do fun things here. It's very bulky. Obviously, Heavy Duty Boots is a great item for it, so I don't have to worry about hazards too much with it. So yeah, Volcanion's here. It's going to hopefully do some massive things for me this season. I am very, very excited to use it. Now, moving forward, I only had, at this stage in the draft, after all these huge pickups, I only had myself 11 points between 4 mons, which is it's kind of a lot, really. I really needed to think a little bit carefully about how I went with the lower portion of my draft, considering I still have some incomplete archetypes. I don't have a dragon type, I don't have a ground type, I also don't have a good psychic type at this point, so there were a lot of things I needed to consider at the back end of this draft. I also needed to take into account my Terra types, because the PPL rules when it comes to Terra are very unique, in a good way obviously. They are genuinely interesting Terra rules, because every mon you draft has a separate Terra price, and you are required to pick up at least one Terra captain during your draft. So I had to be very careful about how I spent my points. We are allocated 20 points to draft from a separate pool of Terra captains during the season, so you have to cross-coordinate how much your actual Pokemon are going to cost and how much your Terra captains are going to cost to use as Terra types. And as such, I was bashing my head against the wall because I had a few Pokemon that I really wanted to try as Terra this season, such as Lilligant. That was a Pokemon I was really looking forward to trying, but I couldn't fit it in. There was also Frosmoth, which would have been really fun to try out as Terra, but it cost just 1 point too many for me to make the points work with the rest of my plan. So, I settled on a little plan. And I'm not sure whether this was the best way to go. But I figured this probably works and I can always change it using free agencies later on down the line. And so, my first Terra Captain and my next Pokemon is going to be Masquerain. Now, Masquerain has access to some really, really good options. Quiver Dance with Terra is insane. It is really, really good. But not only that, Masquerain has access to Sticky Web. It has access to a lot of utility moves. It's an Intimidator, so if I do want to use it as a defensive pivot, I can do that. It gets U-turn and Baton Pass so that it can be used as a very good pivot, and it already has a very good special move pool with Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, and like Hurricane and Bug Buzz, just as a few things to mention as part of the arsenal. And as such, I wanted to pick Terra types that would complement its offensive move pool and also give it access to some pretty good defensive synergy. And as such, we're going with Flying, Fairy, and Steel as Terra types on Masquerain. Now, Masquerain was 11 points to Terra, so it was quite expensive. The maximum Terra Captain you could have was 15, and that was reserved for things like Delphox, which is absolutely insane. So yeah, Masquerain felt like it added synergy to my team. It also fit nicely at 80 speed, which was a nice little gap between Volcanion and Rillaboom that it sits in between. So I'm happy with it being there. So Masquerain's joining, and hopefully we're going to be able to pull off some very fun sweeps with it. Now next up, we have another Terra Captain, and that is another Pokemon I was trying to build part of my draft around, because I figured this Pokemon has access to some really, really great abilities and offensive moves. This thing it looks really, really underrated for me, and I was so excited to see if I could make it work. I am a creative builder. That is what I'm known for. I build silly, I draft silly, and I make it work. This Pokemon is right up my alley. It is like the Red Eyes Black Dragon of Pokemon, because it has so much potential. I just need to pull it out. And hopefully I am going to be able to pull out the best of Noctowl this season. Tinted Lens with Terra Normal and Terra Flying is going to be insane for opponents to switch into. It has access to things like Nasty Plot, Agility, it has Tailwind and Defog and Roost and U-Turn and Heat Wave and all sorts of crazy, crazy good offensive options. And for 2 points, this thing is a steal. Tinted Lens with Terra is one of the most busted things you can do with your Terra. Alongside Quiver Dance, I'm very happy with how I've done that. So we've got ourselves a Noctowl that has Tinted Lens, can Terra to increase its stabs to double power, and also can turn into a fairy type to use Stab Moonblast if I really need offensive fairy coverage. I am delighted with how that has turned out. Terra Noctowl is hopefully going to put in an insane amount of damage and work for me this season. I really can't wait to show this thing off. So yes, Noctowl's here, and we're going to make it work. Now, our final Terra Captain, and a little bit of a deviation from my initial draft plan, because there are two very big Pokemon types I am missing right now that are going to really, really hamper me if I do not fix. I do not have a ground type. I do not have a dragon type. If I had the points, and if it was still available, Garchomp would have been the perfect thing for me right here. Unfortunately, Garchomp is like 17 points, so I was never going to get it. But what is available is Gabite. Dear me. This is the most OnesieBanette pick you can ever see in your entire life. I have picked up Gabite, and made it a Terra Captain. I have made it a Terra Captain with Terra Dragon, Terra Ground, and Terra Steel. It gives me cheap hazards, and it gives me cheap scale shot swords dance. 1 point. 2 points to Terra. I'm gonna regret this. Like, I know I'm a creative builder, but I'm not that creative. Oh, God. Okay, so my theory here is that with Eviolite, I am able to get myself set up very, very well with Gabite, because it gains the defenses that it basically would have as a Garchomp, but as a Gabite. It's also fairly fast, sitting at a base 82 speed. It can become fairly bulky. It hits fairly hard if I'm able to use the Terra on it, so there's always the option for it there. Ideally, I would have liked to have grabbed something else for my Terra, because Masquerain and Noctowl are not always going to want to come, and neither is Gabite, but I figured this thing solved 2 issues for me in 1 slot and still allowed me to try and fix some of my other types later on down the line. So yes, Gabite's here, and he's about to take a Gabite out of the opposition. What is wrong with me? And our final Pokemon that we have decided to pick, because we had 4 points left and we didn't have a Psychic type, and it's still one I'm not 100% sure on, if I'm honest. The theory behind it was that I can pick this thing and I can basically use it to eliminate an answer to one of my bigger threats. I decided to pick up Gothorita for 4 points. Now, this might be a bad decision. I'm not 100% certain and sold on it, so I think I'm probably going to be dropping this at some point, but I'm excited to see if there are any good matchups for it. I may bring it to a game or two. I may use it as a way of getting rid of choice answers to my big threats. For example, if I see, I don't know, there's a Torkoal on the opposition, I'll bring Gothorita, make sure I get massive damage on it so Ogerpon Hearth Flame can potentially sweep later alongside with Rillaboom. If there are any steals that are going to cause Rillaboom a massive heartache, I can get rid of them. If there are any grounds that Gothorita has a good matchup against, I can switch it in and Energy Ball the fuck out of them. So, Gothorita, there's theory there. I'm not sure whether the theory is going to work in practice. This might be a step too far for me. I'm more sold on the Gabite than I am on the Gothorita. But hey, that's just a Gothorita. A onesie Gothorita. What's wrong with me? I'm going to stop this now. But yes, that right there is your team, my team, and your team for the Solihull Skarmours this season in the PPL Bolt Division. And personally, I'm very happy with how it turned out. There are a couple of tweaks I'd like to make. Maybe my Terra types aren't optimal, but what do you think? Make sure you let me know if you think I've done something terrible in the comments so I can try and rectify things, or let me know if you love me and think that I'm an absolute visionary in this format. But yes, either way, that's all from me. You can catch my first game, which will be against Padel and the Glasgow Glasgourers. When are you going to see that? Oh, probably tomorrow? So check back tomorrow for my week 1 game against Padel. And let's make this a good season, shall we? Catch you later, guys. Bye-bye.